which is the question, in what way and by what means can an individual who is under the impression that he is a separate individual, limited by and enclosed in his bag of skin, how can such a person effectively realize that he is deep down the universal self, the Brahman? This, of course, is a curious question. It proposes a journey to the place where you already are. Now, it's true that you may not know that you are there, but you are. And if you take a journey to the place where you are, you will visit many other places than the place where you are, and perhaps when you find through some long experience that all the places you go to are not the place you wanted to find, it may occur to you that you were already there in the beginning. And that is the Dharma, or method, as I translated that word, which all gurus, teachers of spiritual development, use fundamentally. They are all of them tricksters, but in the most beneficent sense of the word trickster. Why trickster? Because, do you know, it's terribly difficult, in fact it's impossible, to surprise yourself on purpose. And yet, to be surprised is a great thing. But you can't plan a surprise for yourself. Somebody else can do it for you. And that is why so often a guru or teacher is necessary in this process. But let me say right from the start that a guru, there are many kinds of gurus. First of all, among human gurus, there are square gurus and there are beat gurus. There are gurus like, well, let's say a great Zen master today. Let's take Oda Roshi at Daitokuji, who is a square guru and a very good one. But you go through regular channels. Then there is a guru like Mr. Gurjak, who is a rascal guru, who leads you in by means that are very, very strange indeed. Then there are gurus that are not people. Gurus may be situations, a certain kind of problem or encounter. Even a book can to some extent be a guru. A friend can be a guru. I've often thought of writing a story about a man who is some sort of guru seeker and potential yogi, who goes one day into an automat and sits down at a table where there is another fellow, and he sort of thinks that this man looks wise, and he projects onto him the idea that he is a guru. And he says, I feel there's something special about him. And the man says, oh really? Really, actually there's nothing special about me. I happen to be an insurance salesman. And this other fellow says, isn't that fascinating how modest he is? And then I want to develop this story, step by step. They keep meeting each other because they both eat at the same automat regularly for lunch. And although the fellow really is an insurance salesman and doesn't know a thing about these things, it in the end results in the enlightenment of the person who projected this image upon him. So there are, as I say, many kinds of guru. But the problem of the guru is to show the inquirer in some effective way that he already has what he's looking for. Now, in Hindu traditions, the realization of who you really are is called basically sadhana. And sadhana means the discipline, the way of life that is necessary to follow in order to escape from the illusion that you are merely an skin-encapsulated ego. And sadhana comprises yoga, from the root yug, which means to join. And so from that, in Latin, we get jungere, to join, and in English, junction, and also yoke. And junction is also the word union, you see. All this derives from the Sanskrit root, yug. A yoke is also a discipline. When you yoke oxen, that is a kind of a discipline. Now, strictly speaking, in the very strictest sense, yoga means the state of union, the state in which the individual self, what is called the Jivatman. Jivatman is approximately translatable as ego. Jivatman finds that it is ultimately Atman, which equals Brahman, the Supreme Self. So yoga is the state. The strictest meaning of yoga is the state of union, and a yogi means one who has realized that union. But we find that the word is not normally used in that way, in that strict sense. Yoga in the normal way of use means the practice of meditation whereby one comes into the state of union, and the yogi means one who is a traveler, a seeker, who is on the way to that point. But again, strictly speaking, there is no method to arrive at the place where you are. And no amount of searching will uncover the self. Because all searching implies the absence of the self. The big self, the self with a capital S. So that to seek it is to thrust it away. And to practice a discipline to attain it is to postpone realizing. There is a famous Zen story told of a monk who was sitting in meditation, and the master came along and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm meditating to become a Buddha." Whereupon the master picked up a brick that was lying nearby and started polishing it, rubbing it. And the monk said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm rubbing this brick to make it a mirror." He said, "By no amount of rubbing could you ever make a brick into a mirror." The master replied, "By no amount of zazen could you become a Buddha." Zazen means sitting meditation. They react very badly to this story in modern day Japan. Anyway, what is important, you see, quite radically here. Supposing that I say to you, each one of you is really the great self, the Brahman. And you say, well, yeah, all you've said up to now makes me fairly sympathetic to this intellectually, but I don't really feel it. What must I do to feel it really? My answer to you is this. You ask me that question because you don't want to feel it really. You're frightened of it. Therefore, what you're going to do is you're going to get a method of practice so that you can put it off. So that I can say, well, I can be a long time on the way getting this thing. And then maybe I'll be worthy of it after I have suffered enough. See, because we are
I feel like I've already played this one.
Whereby we have to deserve what we get.
Maybe it's just a really similar
For
game.
all good things is suffering. But all of that is precisely postponed. Because one is afraid, here and now, to see it. If you have the nerve, real nerve, you would see it right away. Only that would be, when one feels it, you should have nerves like that. Well, that would be awful. That would be, that wouldn't do at all. Because after all, I'm supposed to be poorer than me. And I'm not really much of a muchness. And I'm playing the role of being poorer than me. And therefore, in order to be something great, like a Buddha or a Jivan Mukta, one liberated in his life, I ought to suffer from. So you can suffer from. There are all kinds of ways invented for you to do this. And you can discipline yourself, and you can gain control of your mind, and you can do all sorts of extraordinary things. I mean, you can drink water in through your rectum, and do the most fantastic things. But that's just like being able to run 100 yards in 9 seconds, or push a peanut up Mount Tamalpais with your nose, or any other kind of accomplishment you want to engage in. There's absolutely nothing to do with the realization of the self. The realization of the self fundamentally depends on coming off it. You know, the sort of, when we say to people who put on some kind of attack, they say, oh, come off it. And some people can come off it. They laugh and say, they suddenly realize, they're making fools of themselves, and they laugh at themselves and they come off it. So in exactly the same way, the guru, the teacher, is trying to make you come off it. Now if he finds he can't make you come off it, he's going to put you through all these exercises, so that you, at the last time, when you've got enough discipline, enough suffering, and enough frustration, you'll give it all up. You realize you were there from the beginning, and there was nothing to realize. But the guru is very clever. He says, all right, if this is the way you have to go, this is the way you have to go. You asked for it. You came to me, I didn't invite you, see, the guru says. You came to me and said, I want to learn yoga. Well, he said, yoga is human. You're Tattvamasi, you're that. Well, no, you say, I'm sorry, I don't understand that, because I only get it intellectually, I don't feel it. Oh, he says, you're one of those. So I see. I've got to satisfy you. The customer is always right. No? I've got to give you all this work to do. Because you can't see directly that this is so. But he's looking at you in a funny way, you see. The guru is always saying to you, what are you doing? What's your game? Imagine, for example, a father confessor. And you feel terribly guilty that you've committed murders and robberies and adulteries and fornications and all kinds of arson and injury to people and financial shenanigans. And you go to this man and say, I am a terrible sinner. He says, really? He says, I have murdered somebody. He says, how many times? And you think, oh, good Lord. This man doesn't realize how awful I am. And you recite all these things, he's perfectly calm. And then you say to him, well, you don't seem to be very shocked. So he said, you haven't confessed any serious sins. He said, what do you mean by serious sin? Well, he said, what do you think? Well, I don't know, I just feel wrong. I just feel there's something in the basis of me that tells me that I am not what I ought to be. Could it be that I'm spiritually proud? That I'm egocentric? No, that's not. It's very usual. This is quite ordinary sin. But he says you are guilty of something really terrible. And what does that mean? I have no idea. Now he says, come on. Go deeper. What is the real sin? You think what, me? I, little me, could do something worse than murder, worse than spiritual pride? Just little me? I mean, I'm a reasonably well-intentioned person. What does that mean? And he looks at you in a funny way. Did you know? You know, it gets kind of a Kafkaesque situation where you're accused of a crime that's not specified, and yet the accuser says, you jolly well know what you've done. Of course, we can't mention it. Because, it's like those laws that are on the books in the state of California and several other states, where people are accused of the abominable crime against nature. Nobody knows what it is. I mean, it can't be mentioned. It's too dreadful to be talked about. So this guy does the same thing, but it's in a different dimension. You've done it. Now what did you do? See, the real crime is that you won't admit you're God. That's false modesty. So the Guru challenges, you see. He challenges you. If you raise the question, he doesn't go out and preach in the streets. Say, come on everybody, you ought to be converted. He sits down under a tree and waits. And people start coming around, and they offer him propositions. He answers back. And he challenges you in any way that he thinks is appropriate to your situation. Now, if you've got a thin shell, and your mask is easily dispatched with, he simply uses what we might call an easy method. He says, listen, Shiva, come off it. Don't pretend you're this guy here. I know who you are. And the guy sort of twinkles a bit and says, well, I guess you're right. But the people aren't like that. They have very thick shells. And so he has to invent ways of cracking them. So here's how it goes. To understand yoga, you need to get hold of a good translation of Patanjali, the Yoga Sutra. I don't know which is the best translation. There are so many of them. It says it starts out, now yoga is explained. First verse. And the commentators say now has a special meaning because it follows from something else that you're supposed to know beforehand. That you're supposed to be, in other words, a civilized human being before you start out on yoga. We don't teach yoga to baboons. And so you're supposed to have been disciplined in artha, karma, and dharma. In politics, sensuality, and dharma, justice. And then you can start yoga. Then the next verse is Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which means yoga is the cessation of revolutions of the mind. In other words, you can interpret that at many levels. Chitta meaning consciousness, like a pool, like water. like a reflecting pool. If there are waves on that, it doesn't reflect, it breaks up all the reflections. So stop the waves on the mind, and it will reflect reality clearly. Get a perfectly calm mind. That's one meaning of it. Or another meaning of it is stop thinking. Eliminate all contents from the mind, all thoughts, all feelings, all sensations, everything. How will you do that? So it goes on to say you do it by certain steps. First of all, pranayama, which means the control of the breath. Pratyahara, which means preliminary concentration. Dharana, a more intense form of concentration. Dhyana, which is the same dhyana is Sanskrit for Zen, and that means profound union between subject and object. And finally, samadhi, which is way out. Now what's happening? Control your mind. First of all, by breathing. Breathing is a very strange thing, because breathing can be viewed both as an involuntary and as a voluntary action. You can feel I breathe, and yet you can feel it breathes me. And they have all sorts of fancy breathing ways in yoga. They're very amusing to practice, because you get very high on them. So they set you up these tricks. And of course, if you're bright, you may begin to realize some things at that point. If you're not very bright, then you'll have to go on. And so next they really get to work on concentration. Concentrate the mind on one point. Now this can be an absolutely fascinating undertaking. I suggest that you try it this way if you want to make experiments. Select a highlight on some bright, some polished surface, copper or glass or something, where there's a little tiny reflection, say of a candle or an electric light bulb. Look at it and put your eyes out of focus, so that the bright spot appears to be fuzzy. A fuzzy circle. Now look very carefully at the design in the fuzzy circle and see if you can make it out. There is a definite pattern of blur, and you can have a wonderful time looking at that. Then go back and get your eyes into focus and look at intense light. And you can go into it, and into it, and into it. Like you're falling down a funnel. And at the end of that funnel is this intense light. And go down, go in. It's a most thrilling experience. Then suddenly the guru wakes you up and says, what are you doing that for? Well, because I want realization. Why? Because we live in a world of, if we identify ourselves with the ego, we get into trouble, we suffer, we're in a mess. He says, you afraid of that? Yes. So then, all that you're doing to practice yoga is based on fear. You're just escaping, you're running away. How do you think you can get realization through fear? There's one thing about it. So you think, well, now I've got to go on with my yoga practice, my concentrations, my exercises, but not for a fearful motive. And you know that guru, he's watching you. And he's a very, very sensitive man, and he knows when you're doing, he always knows what your motive is. So he puts you onto the kick of getting a pure motive. And And that means very deep control of the emotions. I mustn't have impure thoughts. All right, so you go along and you manage to repress as many impure thoughts as possible, and then one day he asks you, why are you repressing these thoughts? What's your motive for trying to have a pure mind? So you find out that you have an impure motive for trying to have a pure mind. That you did it for the same old reason you started out with in the beginning, because you were afraid, because you wanted to get one up on the universe. And so, eventually, you find out, you see, that your mind is what is called in Sanskrit mudha, which means crazy. Because it can only go in vicious circles. Everything it does to get out of a trap puts it more securely in the trap. Every step in the direction of liberation is a new tie-up. So that you started, with molasses in one hand and feathers in the other. That was the original situation of man. The Guru made you put them together, see, like that, and said, now pick the feathers off. And the more it is, the more of a mess the whole thing gets. So you get involved and involved and involved by this person. And he, in the meantime, you see, has been telling you, yes, you made a little attainment today, but it was only the 8th stage, and there are 64 altogether. And you've got to get that 64th stage. And he knows how to spin it out and drag it all out, because you are ever hopeful that you will get that thing, just as you might win a prize, or win a special job, or a great distinction, and be somebody. That's the motivation all along, only it's very spiritual here. It's not for worldly recognition. You want to be recognized by the gods and the angels. It's the same story on a higher level. So he keeps holding out these baits. And as long as the pupil falls for them, he holds out more baits. Until after a while, the pupil gets the realization that what he's doing is running faster and faster in a squirrel cage. That he's making an enormous amount of progress and getting nowhere. Like in Alice Through the Looking Glass, when the Queen says, here you have to run faster and faster to stay where you are. And so he impresses this upon you by these methods very thoroughly. And at last you find out that you, as an ego, as what you ordinarily call your mind, are a mess. That you just can't do this thing. You can't do it by any of the means that have been held out to you. You can concentrate, yes, you've acquired a considerable power of concentration by doing all this. But you find you're doing it for the wrong reason. And there's no way of doing it for the right reason. See, Krishnamurti does this. He's a very, very clever guru. Krishnamurti says to people, now look, there is nothing you can do to be liberated, because all your efforts in the direction of liberation are phony. They are based on your desire to boost and continue your ego, and that will never lead to liberation. All you can do, he says, is to be aware of yourself as you are, without judgment. See what is. But then, if you can do that, you have no further problem. But if you try to do it, you're in the same mess all over again. Gurdjieff played the same game in a different way. He said, the most important thing is self-remembering. Always at every moment be aware of what you're doing. Watch yourself. constantly and never be absent-minded. So all day, when you know you pick up the piece of paper, you realize, I'm picking up this piece of paper, and I'm opening it inside, and so on. I know I'm doing it this way, so I'm not asleep. Ordinary people, you know, pick up a piece of paper. In this way, we're really picking up a piece of paper. And so all these people are doing this, you know, watching. Now, where do they land up? I've told this story millions of times, really, excuse me, but it's very important. When they teach you in Japanese Zen how to use a sword, the first thing the teacher says to the student is, now, if you're going to be a good soldier, you've got to be alert constantly. Because you never know where the attack's going to come from. Now, you know what happens to you when you try to be on the alert. You think about being alert, and then you're a hopeless prey to the enemy. Because you're not alert. You're thinking about being alert. You must be simply awake and relaxed. And then all your nerve ends are working, and wherever the attack comes from, you're ready. They liken this to a barrel of water. The water is just sitting there in the barrel. But the minute you make a hole in the barrel, the water immediately is ready to come out of that hole. So in the same way, the mind, when it is in the proper state, is ready to respond in any direction from which the attack may come. So this man is no longer alert in the sense of taut and anxious. See? He's sitting there, like a cat sits there. And the minute anything happens, it's right there. Because it didn't have to overcome any set in a direction opposite to that from which the attack comes. If you are set for the attack to come from there, and it comes from here, you have to pull back from there and go there, but that's too late. So you sit in the middle. And you don't expect the attack from any particular direction. So in the same way, all this applies to yoga. You can be watchful, you can be concentrated, you can be alert. But all that will ever teach you is what not to do. How not to use the mind. Because it will get you into deeper and deeper and deeper binds. You have to let it happen. Just like you have to let yourself go to sleep. You can't try to go to sleep. You have to let yourself digest your food. You can't try to digest it. And so in the same way, you have to let yourself wake up. Become liberated. And when you find out, you see, that there isn't any way of forcing it, that for most people is the only way of getting them to stop forcing it. Because they won't believe when you tell them in the first instance, you've got to do this without forcing it. They'll say, well, it won't work, it won't happen. Because I'm very uninvolved. I'm just an ordinary human being. I'm just poor little me. And if I don't force it, nothing will happen. Like people who think that if they don't struggle and strain, they won't have a bowel movement. Or whatever it is. They think they've got to do that work in order to make it happen. In other words, all that is based on lack of faith, not trusting life. And to get people to trust life who don't trust it You have to trick them. They won't jump into the water, so you have to throw them in. And if they are very unwilling to be thrown in, they're going to take diving lessons, you see, in which they're going to go all through, they're going to read books about diving, they're going to do all the preliminary exercises for diving, they're going to stand on the edge of the diving board and inquire whether there's the right posture, until somebody comes up beside and kicks them in the butt, and they're in the water. And it's also with this. It really is. So, now the most amazing gamesmanship goes on in the whole domain of yoga and spiritual practice. You would be astounded. So, I mean, one of the games in all this is to find a little flaw in it. Everybody has a place where they can be jiggled a bit. Something they're a bit ashamed of, and so you think, does this person really know my secret? He's not saying anything because he's polite, but does he really see through me and know that somewhere are the awful, and that I'm a little bit upsettable? This is all part of religious competition. If you go to the Roman Catholics and you've studied, you've been psychoanalyzed, you see, they'll say, well, that's fine, but of course it's not nearly enough. I mean, that's all very well so far as it goes, but, or if you're a Roman Catholic and you go to a Buddhist outfit which is on a missionary basis, they'll say, yes, of course through your Catholicism you've learned some of the basic virtues, but of course Catholicism doesn't go anywhere near the heart of things, because it doesn't have an elaborate system of meditation like we have. You go to Hindu school and you say it's Buddhist to a certain point. They do attain a very, very high stage of realization, but there is nevertheless something higher than that, which they don't quite get. And you'll find this all round the world. Everybody claiming to have that little special extra essence which the others don't have. And why are they doing that? Are they all frauds? Are they all out to get you into their society? Sometimes yes. But sometimes they are trying to see where you fall to this, testing you out. This is upaya, skillful method. And if you become falling for that little extra special thing that's just supposed to be around the corner, then they've got you. Or rather, you've got yourself in the mix. And you have to work at that and work at that and work at that until you find out that you were being made a monkey of. But you were being made a monkey of because you could be made a monkey of. You haven't really arrived where you are. You didn't have the nerve to be you. That is to say, to be the self. And so you had always to feel that there was something beyond that, the stage higher. So that's why, for example, Masonry is such a success. It has 33 degrees. And you know, you can go up that ladder and get higher and higher stages. The more degrees, the better. There have been things that invented hundreds of degrees. And they're an immense success. Because you can postpone it longer and longer, like Achilles overtaking the problem. He doesn't overtake it in the problem because we keep dividing the space between Achilles and the tortoise as he approaches the tortoise. What delays Achilles overtaking the tortoise is not Achilles, but our calculations about how he approaches it. We make the calculations more and more complicated as he gets nearer and nearer to the tortoise. So it's only the calculations that put it off. Achilles, in fact, runs right by. So in the same way, you can calculate yourself out of liberation. You can put it off indefinitely by inventing new degrees and new stages. But actually, when you get it, you don't get it. You suddenly see it. It happens instantly. It happens instantly whether you put in 30 years practice or whether you put in 3 minutes. It's the same. Suddenly it dawns on you that that's the way things are. That's honesty. Medieval society in the West, comparable to Hindu society, allowed people to check out of the game. It revered and encouraged hermits, monks, nuns, of various types of discipline. There's this difference, you see, for the West and India. You couldn't join the Brahmana caste, the priest caste, from some other caste. But in the European caste system, by becoming a priest, or a cleric of any kind, you see, a cleric means simply a literate person, you could familiarize with any other caste once you're in that one. And so it was a wonderful way of rising in society. You could, from being a serf, go to being a priest, to being an archbishop, and consort with the nobility. It was the only way open to cross castes, you see. And because they were the literate people, it was through literacy and through universities founded by clerics that our caste system began to break. And we got the idea of choosing your own vocation and not simply following what your parents did. Now I want to make an observation here about checking out of the game. This is not encouraged in contemporary society. Because the Catholic Church and the Episcopalian Church are very powerful minorities, they can still support monasteries and even hermits. But you can't be one on your own without great difficulty. Firstly, because you're a poor consumer. See, around here we have a number of hermits. There's a guy out there building that boat, and he's essentially a non-joiner, a poor consumer, and the community, they live a lot along here. And they're not working class people. They are people who dropped out of college because they thought it was stupid. And they're that sort of people. We would call them perhaps people. But you see, the city doesn't like it because they aren't owning the right sort of cars, and therefore the local car salesman isn't doing business with them. They don't have lawns, and so nobody can sell them lawnmowers. They hardly use dishwashers, appliances of that kind. They don't need them. And also they wear blue jeans and things like that, and so the local dress shops do a bit put out, having these people around. And they live very simply. Well, you mustn't do that. You've got to live in a complicated way. You've got to have the kind of car, that identifies you as a person of something, status and all that. So there's a great problem here in our society. Now, why is there this problem? There's always a very inconsiderable minority of these non-joiners or people who check out of the game. But you will find that insecure societies are the most intolerant of those who are non-joiners. They are so unsure of the validity of their game rules that they say everyone must play. Now that's a double bind. You can't say to a person, you must play, because what you're saying is, you are required to do something which will be acceptable only if you do it voluntarily. You see? So everyone must play is the rule in the United States. And it's the rule in almost all Republican governments. I mean, mean Republican in the sense of democratic. Because they're very uneasy. Because everybody's responsible. You mean you may try not to be and avoid it and say, oh, let the senators take care of it or the president. But theoretically, everyone's responsible. Now that's terrifying. See, it's all right when you know what's right. There is an aristocracy, there is the clergy, and they know what should be done, and they're used to ruling, you see. But now it's in your hands. You say, well, what are we going to do? Well, I think this way, and you think that way, and he thinks the other way. And so we're all unsettled. And therefore, we become more and more conformist. Individualism, rugged individualism, always leads to conformism. Because people get scared. And so they herd together, and it compounded with industrial society, mass production, etc. They all wear the same clothes, and they're sensible clothes that don't show the dirt too much. And we get duller and drabber, and with the exception of the Californian Revolution. So the reason for this is, in a way, that democracy as we have tried it started out on the wrong foot.
Right.
You see, in the scriptures,
That's right.
in the Christian scriptures, it says everybody is equal in the sight of God. Now that's a mystical utterance. That means that from the standpoint of God, all people are divine and are saved in others. And that is something that is true on a certain plane of consciousness. But come down a step and try to apply the mystical insight in the practical affairs of everyday life, and what you get a parody. You get the idea not that everybody is equal in the sight of God, but that all people are equally inferior. And that's why all bureaucracies are rude, why the police are rude, and why you're made to wait in lines and are scrupulous income tax individuals and all that sort of person. Because everybody's a crook. Everybody's equally inferior. So that becomes the parody of life. And that kind of society, watch out for it. It turns in a quick click into fascism because of its terror of the outside. Now, a free and easy society loves outside. In fact, it's a little bad for the outside of the thing because you become holy man. And people make salams and give him food and all that they do to take care of the outside. Because they know that man is doing for us what we haven't got the guts to do. That outsider who lives up there in the mountain is at the highest peak of human being. His consciousness is one with the divine. And great, just that is someone like that around. Makes you feel a little better. He has realized, he knows what it's all about. So we need a number of those people. Even though they don't join our game, they tell us, you see, what you're doing is only a game. It's okay, I'm not condemning, but it is only a game.
Jag vet inte
And we up on that mountaintop.
Well,
We love you. We have compassion
yeah,
for
that's
you. And,
well,
but excuse me,
yeah,
we don't
not real. And you will assume the sunlight will something to afford now. How grant you to access to the servers building basement.
That's why wise kings kept not only priests, but court fools. The court fool is much more effective than the priest. To remind the king that after all he's human. And, you know, our in Richard II, where the fool is called the antic, the king says,
Tu ciężko w kościołach zmarło się?
the hollow crown, the crown of
Oh, English. All right, I was wondering if you were interested in making some cash? I would need someone to do diversion. Just make a scene at the police station on Rachel Street, next to the fire station, so I can steal some vampire evidences. Well, whenever you're ready. Alright, it's up to you. You know where to find me if you change your mind.
Hey, Dave.
Same way when you have hiccups. You didn't plan on it. You did have belly rumbles. You had no intention of doing it. And as the catastrophic act of getting born, well, you had nothing to do with that. And you can spend all your life blaming your parents for putting you in the situation in which you find yourself. And this way of looking at the world in this sort of passive mood, something is happening. Goes right down to our memory too. It goes down to the way in which, as Westerners, we have been accustomed to look at human existence as areas And there
Je me mets dans le couple des fois.
Lui était avec le dessin.
You're not really part of those. And I can use a stronger word than part of them, you don't have it.
Oh, Chris, c'est vrai. Intéressant. Haha, indeed. Will you please bring that to Dr. Naro at the hospital? Ask him to do the usual test.
Hello, ça va bien? You've just found... Okay, well, I don't have it here. She lives on Rue Panay, number 2015. She forgets stuff all the time, and she went on vacation. I'm glad you gave me a copy. Hello, ça va bien? Great, thank you. Oh, by the way, Eknor let me know that Catherine would be happy to chat with you. She's usually at her office at night. She manages the funeral co-op on Papineau Boulevard. It's called Urgel Bourgie.
But what one has to realize is that the space is an essential function of the things in the space. After all, we can't have separate stars unless there is a space in it. If we eliminate the space, you will see you couldn't have this phenomenon at all. And vice versa. We couldn't have the space. It wouldn't be there in any sense whatsoever if we weren't bodies in it. So the bodies in the space and the space are two aspects of the same continuum. They're related together in exactly the same way that I can find it. And we just don't get on that one. So the moment you see that images that space is connected, you can understand advance how you are not just to be exclusively defined as a flash of consciousness that occurs between two atoms of darkness. It brings the popular common sense to his Western meaning as his own life. If you consider that in the darkness that comes before your birth, there is no you, and in the eternal darkness that follows your death, there is likewise no you. And I am going to discuss the matter, not by opinion, to any special completely knowledge, as if I had been traveling on a higher plane and knew all my previous incarnations, and therefore could tell you authoritatively that you are much more than this individual. I'm going to do it on the basis of complete common sense, that everybody has access to that. And that that's what you have to realize, is that life is of pattern, immense pattern. And what you call yourself is not I am my whole body. I love it like that. That's why we recognize it. I recognize my friends, we recognize me. Although the last time we were friends, I was not really something entirely different from what I am now. Just as the same
Vous l'avez trouvé, en effet. Bien sûr.
Besoin d'autre chose?
What are you doing here? Yeah, just that. No, I forgot. I'm not sure I could. Let me know if you find anything interesting. Bye.
Oh Chris, c'est vrai. Tu fais pas français. What's up? Okay, let's have it. I bet. Well, I believe.
Yeah, bring it back here if you want. Yeah, she's a smart cookie. She lives above the bake shop on Russell Street, just after Papineau.
You will see a circle of fire. Because because the reflection of that cigarette tip on your retina lasts to endures. Just in the same way as on a radar screen. An image stays with the light until it's revivified by another line. So in that way, you see, you notice continuity. And in the same way then, you notice the continuity of the light. Because although, like say, an arc light is actually a light. That's why they don't allow arc lights to be used when you start working at something slow. Because sometimes the flickering speed of the arc light so synchronizes with the turning speed of the heat ray. The heat look as if they're not moving. And so anybody can put his hand on it, or a cup off, so in this way, very fast impulses are looked upon as constant.
Salut, tu cherches quelque chose à faire? Oh, sure, let me have a look. Quelque chose d'autre? Buses or from the subway station, not very fast. Quelque chose d'autre?
Hey, come over this way.
Thanks. Yeah, the DJ. Oh, that's what.
Oh, no.
Of course. Oh,
Stop it, Ethan. Alright. Well, I suggest you talk about that with Lauren. She's doing the security for the private party upstairs. Go on.
And they impress us and depress us as our own life and death. Our coming and going goes for what is to us such a slow pace that we can't possibly believe that it is really living.
Why? Does he know we're here? Okay, go ahead. Just go through that door and take the stairs to the left.
And so with that point of view, we are not so that we are driving a car looking at the real world. That means the basic process of biology is one in which lower orders are always being superseded by the higher. The lower order can never figure out, or only very rarely figure out, what the higher order is that's taking over. And they see it as a terrible thing. It's a total disaster at the very end. But that can never be aware that the principle of growth always has and always will continue. As that's
What's going on? What do you need an explanation? Oh, that. We believe they react. To be honest? Yeah. Well, that might be true. Sorry, I can't chat.
Do you understand this? If any self-realizing is an event of which we can say you can't. And not something. When we play games, and we will say a chess or a big game, and then we end up the outcome of the game will be so. You will back on concentrating. We'll take you back to the idea that this whole thing is a hide and seek game, is that you don't know what the next order coming up is. But one thing you can do, it will be an order, and it will happen. At the moment we stand at a time where we're beginning to think of the great countdown on the end of the universe. Terrifying possibility that through atomic energy we may obliterate this planet and turn the whole globe into a star. Maybe that's the way all the stars started. Imagine this great thing coming up. The countdown, the end. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And sometimes you're with it. You follow it. And then sometimes you see it. It's just as if you know they're really animated. Now we pick up a hamster. A guinea pig. You hold it to the thing in your hand. Don't find this stuff. And so the telescope always seems to be conscious to its memory. Now exactly the same way. What's your experience in it? What's it to do? screen out from attention anything that is not immediately important to a scanning system based on sensing data. But quite obviously, you as a complete individual are much more than the scanning. You are in relationship with the external world. The undertow are incredibly different. Going back to this illustration of every living body is something like a flowing machine. The energies of life in the form of temperature, light, air, and food, and so on, are significantly towards this moment in the most magnificently harmonious way.
What do you want?
And you're all of them far more beautiful than they're sitting in these chairs. Only we're so used to it.
Oh, Chris, c'est vrai. Tu fais pas français. What's up?
Oh, really? Huh. Great. Sounds good. Let's do that.
When anything is constant, it says, okay, that's safe, it's in the bag, you can go with the bag. Therefore, we eliminate systematically from our awareness all the bogus things that we do all the time. And instead, only the time, the things which is all right, if we make too much of it. And we make so much that we are very sorry. So if you really think that you are not simply that scanning mechanism, but you are your complete organism, then very swiftly, in turn, as a consequence of that, you become aware.
Loving you feels like heaven and hell.
On the MIC, see me when I step on the scene. I do or die all my life with or without a team. Fast and slow, bro, you can't catch me though. Too fast, too fine, and now it's all trick or treat. And the streets love me, the game is easy. Pockets full of cash, please believe me. So I can spend weeks in a hotel suite. Couple model bros, playing trick or treat. And the streets love me.
I am under your spell. Loving you feels like heaven and hell. You got me, boy, I am under your spell. Loving you feels like heaven and hell. You got me, boy, I am under your spell. Loving you feels like heaven and hell.
Cette réunion du conseil d'administration de la Montgomery International.
Brad, Brenda.
Brenda, Brett. Brett, Brad. Brett.
Eh bien, j'aimerais d'abord ouvrir la...
Make me laugh. The very structure. Yep.
When you see a pattern, I can see it here. that this woman is there. It isn't done. And there isn't anything that's done. That is the deception we get because we have two parts of speech in our ground. We have nouns and verbs. And verbs are supposed to describe the activities of nouns. And this is simply a convention of speech. We have a language from the verb. And we don't have a perfectly adequate to describe what's going on in the world. So if we were used to speaking in a language that had one part of speech, you could say just as much as we can, with two, and be a lot clearer. Only at first it would sound awful. And then when you got used to it, it would be a matter of common sense that the patterning of the world is not some kind of stuff that's patterning. You don't have to seek for a substance underlying that. This is patterning. And we're all that. And so it is today. There is the person who really wakes up. You will very soon realize that your existence is not something that is just the hopeless little creature that suddenly confronted with a great big external world that just eats him up. Every harmless little thing comes into being. Every minute
Ça sonnait pas. Qu'est-ce que t'as C'était pas.
Pas you, man. Pas you, man. No. For focus.
They're from.
Irrésistible, doublé d'une perspicacité flamboyante.
Annulez la fête.
Loving you feels like heaven and hell. You got me, boy, I am under your spell. Loving you feels like heaven and hell.
Sun is coming.
So, as you become aware of this, you see the same thing that you notice in the movie. Namely that it is only as a result of
Could have a voice, Christoph.
What's going on?
You don't hear the interval of the thunder, and all notes are the same noise. All you hear is rhythm. You don't hear them. You got to hear them. So then watch
Oh yeah, she's
the things that aren't said. The things that are tacit. The things that are implicit rather than explicit.
yeah, gotta be power.
Then you begin to get connected. That's very important to have a connection.
Smell.
And you feel the know. And this is the way it becomes on. Now seeing the thing you forgot. No, you can always but very helpful. I'm just saying it's not difficult. This is something completely obvious. You'd easily do it because it's so. That's the hardest thing to do. What's the most fun? Because we have all been living in a period of universe in which the individual is simply involved in something that happens to us. And we feel that this thing that happens to us is reality, it is facts that we have to face and accept and cope with. It's always something other than you. You don't recognize it as an integral part of your own being. Without which you can't know what the meaning of your life. But in the truth of the matter is that if you will trace it out, every single one of us knows it doesn't exist. There is a as it were, a recess of the soul, of the psyche, where everybody knows perfectly well
Perfectly well.
that you are not what is irresponsible with a knife and sometimes so you might say, in a funny backward way, that the only kind of control you really understand is that way you're not using your will. Because you can do it, so you do it, like this, and you take your hand. You know how to do it? So you know. You can't put it in your will. You explain it to somebody. As a man sows, so also has a Western flavor, which is of the causal, very delicate, and slightly different. This arises, that becomes. I can see this and that.
I guess I should try to escape. Where am I going? Oh yeah, to somewhere. Let's do it.
Salut!
First of all, we have to be clear about karma, that it is not to be understood
Salut!
in the Western sense of the law of cause and effect, or
Oh, it's Elisa. But the dialogue doesn't trigger something new and so that means I will need to go back to Sylly.
Salut!
The only healthy legal tradition we have in the West is British common law, which proceeds in an entirely different way from code law. Because you see, the difference between code law and common law is that code law is laid down by the wisdom of an all-powerful ruler who tells everybody how they must behave, and they must obey him. But common law is evolved by discussion of particular cases, rather than referring all the time to abstract principles which are put down in words. And the judge, the good judge, is a wise man, a more organic way of reasoning. The code law system, which we inherit from our most ancient theological background, is a tyrannical method of law by imposition. And so we must understand that in both individual rules, there is really no fundamental idea of obedience to a personal ruler. Certainly not in Buddhism. A little bit sometimes in Hinduism. But even then we get terribly mixed up because, for example, I was talking to the Bhagavad Gita. This is often translated the Lord's Song. Now for Bhagavan, or Bhagavat in Sanskrit, Lord is an English equivalent, is quite inappropriate. Because a Lord is one who lords it over you. Bhagavan is a title of reverence and respect and love. The song of the beloved would be much better in a way, although it's not quite correct from a strict point of view. We don't really have an equivalent in this way to Bhagavan. So, although you see there has been in India itself tyrannical rule, and although the Arthashastra has a number of politics, it gives directions to the power. It's the kind of government by absolute power. Going along with this exposition of this very Machiavellian point of view of government is the constant advice of the sage. Yes, this is what you have to do in order to fulfill your office as a ruler, but never forget that you'll never succeed. The more you try to rule things by force, the more you will stir up violence against you. And so you can never hold on to your power and your possessions. It will always flow away from you. So it was one of those great rajas of ancient India who asked the jeweler to make him a ring that would restrain him in prosperity and support him in adversity. And the jeweler went on the ring to the class. But when we come to the deep cosmological and metaphysical ideas, we don't have law in the Western sense, and therefore nature is not looked upon as something which is an orderly system because it is obeying a commandment. In the West, we inherit the idea of law from those ancient conceptions of God, and it is even passed down to science, where we discuss laws of nature. But one recognizes more and more in the sciences that what we call laws of nature are simply observed regularities in the way things behave. And in order to observe regularities, you must look at things through something regular. That is to say, you must lay a ruler alongside it, or compare their behavior with the regular behavior of the clock. The clocks and rulers are human inventions. They are regular measures which we use for comparing the rates of change. So a clock is a measure of the rate of change. It's quite arbitrary. But we very easily compare our regulation measuring devices with what makes things happen. As if the sun rises because it sits in the morning. That being completely backwards in one thing. And we get into the same conclusion when we imagine, for example, that money is wealth. Here we have fantastic wealth, and we have the technological possibility of making everybody on earth the enjoyer of an independent income. We can't do it because people say there's money. But they think money makes prosperity. It's the other way around. It's physical prosperity, which has money as a way of making it. People think money has to come from something, like hydroelectric power or lumber or iron. And it doesn't. Money is something we invent, like interest. So you remember the Great Depression? When there's a sun. Why do we have a sun? Money. There was no less wealth, no less energy, no less raw materials in the world before. It's like you came to work on building a house one day, and you said, sorry, you can't build this house today. many inches. It's not just inches. We don't mean that we got inches of lumber. Yes, we got inches of metal. We even got centimeters. But there's a something inches as such, you see. And people are that crazy. They can have a depression because they've got no interest to go around, or no dollars. That's all a lot of nonsense. But you see, because we get thinking backwards and making the metaphysical tale not like the law, making the law rule things, whereas it doesn't. It's merely a way of measuring what happens. And so you see, when you get into Buddhistic thought, you don't get that confusion. You go the other way around. So you're looking at a system where, to go back to the Buddha's words, this arises, that becomes. Which is a way of saying, you can't have this without that. You can't have here without there. You wouldn't know where here was unless you knew where there was. And they come into being together. You don't get first here and then there, or first there and then here. These arise interdependently. That's the meaning of interdependent origination. And to grasp the idea of interdependent origination is as important as the idea about seeing how things are related by space and images. And seeing, therefore, that you tend to look at life from a myopic point of view, and see details, see the trees and not the forest, see yourself as something loosely related to everything else that's going on, and not integral to it. You see the figure, but ignore the background. But the figure and the background arise mutually. They are to each other as this is to that. And so, we really have to rid our brains of the notion of causality. The notion of causality being that present sets of circumstances are the result of past circumstances. And therefore certain events which are called causes are responsive.
Many never kept in touch. That's why she shies away from human affection. But she's going for the right, trying to follow to them.
Salut!
Okay, bye. This dialogue is great.
So when you see that what we call separate events don't exist, it becomes nonsense to speak of one event causing another. What you really mean is that the two events which we speak of as being causally related are simply two parts of the same thing. They go with each other in the same way as this with that. The relationship is not causal. It is reasonable. And it works two ways in time, because so-called future events are not really passive constants. But you can easily see when, for example, any biological process goes on. You can reason just as well from the future to the past as from the past to the future. Why do two mammals have sexual intercourse? Well, it isn't just that they enjoy it. It's also that they're a very complex system which does this because it makes babies. And the prospect of babies works in reverse and creates desire. You can reason that way. Oh, it's silly. Because the whole process is one. And when we speak human, we tell us if I'm going downtown to buy groceries, then a future event will be said to be the cause of getting to the house. Fine groceries. The difficulty we have in seeing these things is that we think in a real way. When you think in either or way, you see the thickness in the back and moving, and therefore being responsible for their action. And if somebody argues the other way around and says the thickness are just following my But you see, it wiggles along, and its wiggle is conceivable, you see, as convex or as a concave. On which side of the snake is it? It's very easy to see that. And we have interactive work.
Yeah, kinda. I think I know where the chemicals from on the other body come. A gas station. Probably just the provider. Pretty sure they don't know what it's for. If you feel like it, maybe we can find a clue. Doesn't cost anything.
they should be able to play certain games on their own. Well, nothing really interesting happens, everybody plays after. The whole world will be like a light system. So they have to reason that into it in order to save face for God. Because otherwise he could be blamed for all the tragedy instead of our being able to say to each other that God.
Oh, the latest customer details. Let's have a look. Antoine Calvet, Gerard Van... Doesn't cost anything.
The distinction between what we do and what happens to it is obliterated. And therefore we would say with Hindus and Buddhists that if I run into a catastrophe, it is my karma. You see, that means far more than that it is a punishment for something I did wrong in the past. That is a legalistic view of karma. But a naturalistic or organic view of karma is, in fact, that what happens to me is what I do. And that in a certain sense, I want what happens to me. You can use want. Notice how we use this word. We use the desire, we use the lack. We say to somebody, you're wanting. You're deficient in something. You need it. So it's rather alarming, really, when you consider it, that you always get what you want. Invariably. Even though you may think that it's entirely opposed to your wishes. But if it's your karma, everything that happens to you, put it in another way, everything that comes to you is a return to you of what goes out of you. Yes, obviously, that's absurd. If you confine the definition of yourself to your voluntary, conscious behavior, that's a ridiculous definition of oneself. Oneself, by any stretch of the imagination, must involve far more than the conscious and voluntary aspects of our behavior. And if we see that it involves intimately and inescapably
What's going
the
on?
behavior of what we call the other, the not self, the environment, and see that these two are moving together like the two sides of the snake when it swims, then you get a very curious feeling. You have to be careful. Because you've got a Western background. Because this is what happens to a lot of people who play around with psychedelic chemicals.
Tu veux quelque chose?
There are many, many cases of inflation among these people. That is to say, when you get this sensation that the two sides of the world, the inside and the outside, are living together, you may think, I'm in God, doing the best in some of the world. Therefore, your ego, instead of being, as it were, integrated and transcended with all this process, merely assumes vast dimensions, as megalomania, is blown up by the mystical experience. And so you get the holier than thou people going around, who seem to think that they're above all human conventions and have no obligations to anyone or anything, because they're divine and they can do as they damn please. But what they haven't realized is that doing as you will isn't a new kind of behavior that you suddenly put on and say, from now on I'm going to go around doing as I will. You have to realize, Ross, that that's what you've always been doing. And you can look at this from a very simple point of view. It's not a complete point of view. But you can say, well, now what about the people who did good? And who did the things that they didn't want to do? You know, everybody's mother said, darling, sometimes we have to do things we don't like. Well, you can always say, the kid obeyed the mother and did the thing that he didn't like because that was the better part of wisdom. In other words, if he hadn't done that, something worse would have happened. And we choose the lesser of two evils. And when you find yourself in a situation where you have to choose the lesser of two evils, then you say, I want olive here. You take the easiest way, you take the line of opportunity. So that's your doing. Now, you can pursue that more profoundly when you stop thinking about human behavior as something that responds to the compulsion of an environment. And you can get out of that when you see the behavior of the environment as an essential
Oh, wow,
aspect of you.
efficace. Tu me surprends déjà. Je laisserai Serena savoir. On dirait qu'ils utilisent ces produits dans le but de contrôler la bête. T'as raison. Est-ce que ça vaut le coup? Je pense que tu devrais parler à Willem. Il a probablement des bons conseils sur le sujet. Son bureau est sur la rue du Luth.
Besoin d'autre chose?
You very often feel that a hill is lifting you up as you walk up it. The ground seems to heave beneath your feet and not be level. And you get this strange feeling of lightness, of effortlessness. Walking on now, never a care. You know? This wonderful sense that there are no obstructions anywhere. There's nothing as it were banging you and making you do that. It all flows together. That's a very common sense. That's, you are actually, in that state of consciousness, you are perceiving the goings on, the Tao, the force of nature, in the way it's happening. But in the ordinary way, you've been conditioned to resist it, to fight it, and to use those sensations of resistance to create a sensible basis for what we describe as the ego. The ego, in practice, is a sense of strength. When you are aware of I, you are aware of this basic discomfort, which is located basically between the eye and in here. So tight. Also from another point of view, in solar plexus and the various physical centers, in other words, where this constant tension, resistance against it is going on. And that's what you feel when you talk about I. When that tension ceases, you discover immediately that the separate ego has disappeared. And that what I refers to is simply the total panoramic experience. Everything that's happening. Now, not obviously I don't know all of it, because I can't inspect all of it with my radar, with my consciousness. That would be a ridiculous undertaking to know everything in that sense. You know it in a better way, as you know how to go there and make use of consciousness. So, this point of view can be understood and be clarified in the problem. And I suppose the first problem is, if we accept that everything happens to us without any consequence, then we have to be very careful of, I would say, the devil of feeling that your ego is what is in control. And the second thing is, if you think then that everything that happens to everybody is what they really want to happen, then you can absolve yourself from any harm about being unkind to someone. Because you could say, well, the unkindness I did you is what you really wanted, wasn't it? You know that business about the responsibility of the person who gets murdered, for getting murdered? There is a curious sense in which a lot of people go around looking for trouble. Freud pointed out quite correctly the psychology of accident-prone individuals. They seem to be attracting trouble like lights attract moths. we're all doing now, but we manage to remain unconscious of it, so that we can praise and blame. Play the game that says, that's not my fault, that's your fault. And so we go around apportioning faults to everybody. Because if we're going to apportion praise for what good things people do, we can't make praise mean anything unless we also go around blaming. Praise and blame go together. Supposing everybody is acting in a praiseworthy way, and we praised everybody for everything, you don't get tired of it. They wouldn't even notice it anymore. So long as you're going to get a kick out of being praised, you've got to go around blaming too. It's very simple. But if you see the folly of that praising and blaming are just creating each other, then you don't praise and you don't blame. You just dig the whole thing. And that's why, when we encounter very great sages, you never hear them blame people, and they very rarely close them. You try to start gossip in the presence of such a person. You make a derogatory comment about someone. It's as if you had thrown a rock into a well and thought no splash. And you can't breathe. Because you get no response. You get no agreement. And if you praise somebody, there's also likely nothing to be said, except perhaps some remark that, of course, you're praising the beloved in all its manifestations. And this disconcerts some people terribly. But I've always noticed that real sages never gossip, never criticize personally. And because they understand so well. The French saying,
to comprendre, c'est tout pardonner.
to understand all is to forgive all. Is so true with your experience in just the ordinary way of dealing with human problems. You can be a counselor or psychotherapist or minister or anything like that. You very soon get to realize how vastly complicated people are, and see that they really are in the messes they're in, not because of anything. But that's the way it is. And you stop blaming people, and because you don't blame people, you have open ears, and people come and seek your advice. They don't want to come to someone who's a counselor who is all around. Like dentists who simply accept the fact that people really don't take care of their teeth. You realize that the job of a dentist is precisely to look after people who can't be bothered to take care of their teeth. Why is it business? So a good dentist doesn't go all his patients out because they just do this, that, and the other. Except the same as doctors. They know perfectly well that nobody's going to live how they live. They're very dangerous to what they are. There's every kind of theory about how you ought to live, what is healthy, but they change in fashion. And you ought to eat this kind of diet in 1921. By the time it's 1930, they changed their ideas altogether. By the time it's 1960, it's back again to the midst of 1931 and maybe 94. Something like that. It's always changing. So, while the rules are not so... You see, if they were all absurd, it would be easy. But they're not all absurd. There's some truth in all of it. But nobody's ever quite sure. So the function of heroes and doctors and so on is just to do what can be done to stop the mess getting too messy. And then it's accepted itself. That's right. By good healthy, so you got five in the hand. So you're good. Now, what about it then? We have difficulty in seeing this mutuality of our relationship to the world. Because it's not with the policies, not with the way we can go about it. Therefore, we have what I would call an initial intellectual block in understanding. Quite apart from an emotional block or anything like that. But obviously, we must overcome that intellectual block if we're going to go any further and actually realize and feel this way of life including what we do in life. Then the question arises, then what do I do? Do I go around saying to myself, all this that's happening to you is what I want. I am inside and outside. I am the subject and I am the object. And then I need to around thinking thoughts about this, so that we go and talk ourselves into this way of feeling. Well, that's very superficial. Because this new sense of relationship to nature is something much more than an idea. See, ecologists and physicists have the idea that this is so. But they mostly, in their private life and in their ordinary human behavior, are just like other people who don't feel it, and who feel themselves in the Newtonian Buddhist game, even though they've gone on to quantum mechanics. So that there may be a transition from our ordinary way of feeling how things go on to the new way, we have to do something other than think. Because actually thinking is causing the problem. It is by thinking that we divide the world into separate events, in separate things. That is calculus. And Ananda Kumaraswamy once described the life of the liberated being as a perpetual, uncalculated life in the present. And you say, wow, I don't think I can do that. That saying of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, be not anxious for tomorrow. The uncalculated life. If God so clothes the grass of the field, will be not much more clothe you. And I have never met a preacher yet who would really take that up. They all say, well, of course, that's too hard a saying. It's not practical. Everybody has to take thought for tomorrow and calculate. Well, at this point, people can go in two directions. There's one class of people who will say, all right, let's live the uncalculated life. Let's not think. And before you know where they are, they're living and scrounging around, living on petty fever and so on. This is the usual thing. This is got into it the wrong way. The first thing to do is just as I said, whether you like it or not, and whether you know it or not, the relationship between you and the environment is always one that is harmonious. So in the same way, you are always living the uncalculated life. You have to find out, first of all, that you're always doing it. And that what you call your calculations, and the things you did, were tiny little rationalizations. In other words, your ego has about as much control over what goes on as a child sitting next to his father in a car with a plastic steering wheel, who is turning the car the way Daddy drives it. because, as I pointed out, most of the functions, most of the goings on, in you, around you, the circumstances of life, have nothing to do with where you go at all. And you don't even know why you make up your mind to do certain things. We know superficially, we have a few ideas. Like when you enter into a marriage, you have really no control of the top, in the ordinary sense of ego control. You've taken a colossal gamble, in which you've involved enormous complexes of patterns. And maybe it will come out all right if you don't even feel it too. You know, it's like Oppenheimer said, it's perfectly obvious that the whole world is going to hell. And the only possible way we might stop that happening is not to try to prevent it. You know, all these wars are started out by people who think that they're helping someone. That it's going to make things better. So, when you begin from the basis, not of saying, I should now live the spontaneous and improvident and non-calculating style of life, but realize you've always done that, only you rationalize that you didn't. You always did what you wanted to do. Basically. I mean, you said sometimes it was my duty. But you prefer a conception of yourself as someone who always does his duty. That flattered you. And so you were still following your own way. And the first thing then is to see that. That's what's happening. So that you don't think, well now, there is some special thing I have to do to understand this harmonious relationship between the individual and God. Because if you work on it that way, you will start from the presupposition that that relationship doesn't already exist and has to be brought into being. It doesn't have to be brought into being. There. But now when you see that that's so, it obviously starts to make a difference. You do behave in a different way. But the behavior, the new kind of behavior that is a result of a transformation, is not forced behavior. When you try to imitate the way a saint behaves, you have made a forced change, and you know all forced behavior is phony. It's like someone saying, I love you, I love you, I love you, when you don't. You feel you ought to, but you don't really. And there's something that doesn't ring true. You think of the poor Lord, listening to all the prayers of all the people saying, I love you, Jesus. And he knows they don't. They're just saying this because they think they ought to. And you really try. So, whenever you do a thing like that, you make a forced change. Now, if the change is to happen in the same way that a seed at proper season breaks open and sends up a shoot, see? It comes from the whole force of life itself. Now, when you see that without your having to do anything, see, you are living the uncalculated life. You're only pretending you're calculating it. Then, as it were, you will have a grasp of the total situation. And it will, you can allow it to produce changes in action which are not forced. So this is why there is always a trend in every kind of spiritual doctrine which says something about grace, divine grace. There must come about something in you, a change, which you can't produce. And if you try to produce it, you will be the victim of spiritual development. On the other hand, all teachers are universally saying, you've got to make an effort. There's some discipline, there is something you must do. that's the only way to get it across to people. That you, as a separate effort maker, are a myth, are a phantasm. Because
Thank you.
if you really try to control your mind, and only think the thoughts that you think are good thoughts to think, you will find that you're going round in a circle. Krishnamurti is awfully good at pointing this out. When people ask him, how do you meditate? He says, why do you want to meditate? Why are you concentrating? Why are you saying prayer? Why do you think you should believe in God? And it always comes up because I'm just a son of it. I mean, I'm out for my own good, and this seems to be the way. So he says, you see, you don't have any genuine love at all. It's all fake. And so you have to find, first of all, where the genuine love is. Now you love you, don't you? That's genuine. You won't argue about that. But then, when you start from this, I gave a talk sometime ago. Yeah. The lab where they make weapons, do all the research. And they got a bunch of us there who were ministers of philosophy. And they had the nerve to ask, they got us out, basis for moral behavior, personal moral behavior. Well, I said, my basis for moral behavior is pure thought. And I'm talking after all realistic people here. I don't think we need to be sentimental and move about words. They're all warriors and fighters and so on, and you know how that people are. So I'm going to say to you frankly, I'm out for me. Because I don't do it in a tactless way. I don't go around and hit people over the head and say, give me this, give me that. I much more subtle. I say, good manners and please, and how nice you all are, and so on. And finally, people feel massaged psychologically to the state where they'll give. But then after that, there's some things that bother me. The first one is, if I love me, what do I want? And furthermore, who am I? Because if I'm going to be realistic about getting what I want, I'm going to be pretty sure what it is that's me and what is the state of desire in me. If I am desire, if I am a center of desire, what's wrong with that? I think of all the things I want. Well, it so turns out that none of them are me. Well, I say I want dinner. Maybe I'm going to eat dinner. If I any pleasure I can think of is the enjoyment of something that I haven't thought of defining for myself. It's about my sensation, or what happens to my body when I take it up and down and down. But there was a difference between my body and my mind. I also mean I like me and the wine together. Mixed. Then I don't eat you or a friend or a lover in the same way as I drink wine. I live in association and like it. But then I'm loving things that aren't formally supposed to be me.
Sylly and I didn't talk to you.
And as I go into it, in other words, as I investigate what I mean by me, I find that I can't do anything else. That I cannot experience me without me. Or without the other. They're inseparable. But you don't find this out until you investigate. Until you really go into the question, what do I want? And that's the most important
I wanna be free. I wanna break free.
The question is why? And all you live in everything else. And so I said, there is a person without anybody knowing it until I'm out by the death.
partie dans leur carrière. Good to know.
The cardinal feature